Okay, so in this presentation I want to talk about where you can find additional assets and start to manage your environment a little bit more effectively. So the first thing that I want to point out is that I'm starting to work back and forth between the project folder, and you can see there's a hierarchy here that shows assets, standard assets, and so on. I'm just going to select the assets, the uppermost folder in the asset, or in the project folder. Top left-hand corner, of course, we have the hierarchy. Unity works in a system of scenes, and so even though we created a project folder, at this point, our entire environment that we're working in has only been saved to RAM, so it hasn't been saved to your project folder at this point. So I want to make it a point to do that. I'm going to choose File, Save, Scene, and when I do this, I want you to pay attention to what happens inside the asset folder. I'll hit Save Scene. I'm going to let everything default with the exception of the Save As title. And I'll call this, I could call it Island01, or I could call this, what I'll do is I'll call it Level, LVL, or LEVEL, whichever, if I want to shorthand it, I'll do Level, or I could call it Level01, and save that directly in the Assets folder. Once I do that, I now have this Unity scene file that contains everything that I'm looking at here through this environment. Okay, so I have level 1 scene, and in the event that I close this and want to relaunch it, I still have that entire environment created. Unity works in a system of scenes, so if you had multiple environments or want to switch from one location to another, you could manage that with scenes. For the scope of this project, chances are we only need one scene file, so I'll just create level 1, and now I'll continue to push this forward. Now I can actually get a hold of a lot of different assets. If I wanted to, create an illustration, or if I wanted to download some textures from the internet other than using the Unity Asset Store, we can do that, and we can import graphics very easily into our assets folder just by basically copying and pasting them. It's a little outside the scope of this project, so I won't demonstrate that. But if I go to the window pull-down menu and choose to go to the Asset Store, that will open up the asset store, and you will need to log in using your Unity ID. But I want to point out there's all kinds of great assets. A lot of them are paid for assets, while other of those are free. And if I look in the right column, there's categories, there's top paid, there's a top free tab here, and if I click on that, it reveals all kinds of assets that we can download. I'm going to look at currently number 3 is the terrain assets, and if I click on terrain assets, it tells me that I can download and use this for free. And inside the terrain assets, I can actually look and see, and there's all kinds of stuff. And what I'm interested in is there's a lot more textures that come, and this has been put out by Unity, and they're making it available free. So I'll just hit the download button. It tells me that I need to log in order to do this. I remember the right password, I'll just log in and keep myself logged in. And once I hit the download button, you'll see that it downloads, and it'll walk me through a little wizard that will import this asset directly into the current project that I'm working on. So it's very kind of simple, slick, and efficient. And I found that asset, and I can now just import it. There it goes, and I have this little import wizard. I'm going to let everything default and just hit import. And now once this is done running, it's just like importing a package in case we forgot when we created our project file. The only difference is that this was imported from the asset store. And now that I have that, that's an asset that I can use over and over again. So it'll take just a minute for these assets to import. And I'll close my, my asset store window here. Just go over here and click on the little red dot to get rid of the asset store. Now if I look in my assets folder, inside my assets folder I now have standard assets, which is the stuff that we created our project with. Now we also have an additional folder called the terrain assets. Now terrain assets, there's a lot of different stuff in here. We don't need to dig through these folders, because if I go back to my terrain and I go to paint texture and I edit and add texture, and I'll just click on the select button, you'll see that we now have a lot more textures. Now, it takes a little getting used to kind of look at textures that are appropriate to be applied to the terrain. And the kinds of things that you can use are the things that look like they're repeating patterns. And sometimes their names will be useful, but if I look through this list, there are some skies here, and I can see that those are not repeating. So they're not seamless, their edges won't match up. There's also some other textures here that look like pictures of, you know, very specific kind of graphic. That's bright style graphic that we can refer to this as kind of a billboard graphic. And so this is something that sticks in place, that's always registered to the camera. So when we look at this kind of texture, if it's standing up off the ground, it's going to look at this no matter what angle we look at this from. So what I'm looking for is I'm just scanning through and I see there's a forest floor here. That looks pretty cool. There's this grassy lawn and a grassy meadow, so I have a lot more new textures. I have this grass mud, grass rock, and you know, so I can just select these and decide that this is something I'm going to use. So I'll just use the grassy lawn here maybe, and I'll add that. And I'll hit add, and so now I have a whole other texture. So I can play back and forth with these assets, and there's lots of stuff in here that I can start to use. So, you know, it's a real subtle shift from the texture. If I go back or just select my good dirt texture, what I could do is I could refine my environment. Let me just back up a little bit here so you can see this. My goal is to start my user out at the end of the island and have him walk around. So what I could do is I could use this dirt texture, and for now I'll just use it kind of like a sand texture. Okay, even though I think I just downloaded a sand texture, so I'll paint the coastline where I would expect to find sand all around my island. Now what I could also do is take my brush size way down, even smaller than that probably. And what I could do is I could start to draw a path that runs through the island, and the idea is that I could use this kind of as like a wayfinding system to help the user get oriented and suggest that maybe this is the way that they need to go. And if I want to map out, okay, well here the user has a choice to kind of go one way or the other. Okay, and now I can start to really kind of, you know, reference and build up some kind of obstacle here in the map. So I'm really starting to think a little bit more about how the flow of this map is going to go. Okay, so I have a lot more textures, a lot more materials that I can start to use, and I'm starting to think about how I'm applying these textures. I'll just add one more quick texture, and I'll go grab, I saw a grass rock texture, which I think is going to be very useful, so I'll load that. And this grass rock texture I'll use with a much larger brush. And what I'll do is I'll start to paint the, you know, those things that start to get kind of higher in elevation. You know, I can go over here and really kind of start to paint in some rocks. So I'll make that much stronger. You know, so as this goes up, it starts to get more rocky, and I'll come back and, you know, paint my path in there. Okay, so I can just play around with lots of these different textures, lots of different values. I'll grab this cliff here, and oops, I'll add that. There we go. There's my cliff, and so I'll come in here and I'll paint. And so now you can start to see that texture, that tile, is really repeating strongly. Now it may not look so strange once I'm actually walking around on the surface, but I have a feeling that that's going to tile quite a bit. But anyway, so I have some new materials that I can play with. I could even find and download and make my own materials. Now if I start to walk around, my environment, you know, is starting to look a little bit more specific. I can see the path that I can take around the island even though I'm starting in the wrong position. The only thing that looks really strange is that when I look up at the sky, it's this kind of perfectly blue flat sky, and I want to take care of that right now. And the way that I'm going to add a sky graphic or a skybox to the equation, it might be a little less intuitive than some of the previous examples that we looked at. What I want to do is I want to go to the standard assets inside my assets folder. And inside standard assets, there's a skybox folder. And really what I want to do is I just want to familiarize myself with some of the options that are available in here. And I see that I have all these different skyboxes. Now what I want to do is if I go to edit and I go to render settings, that opens up a set of render settings over here in the inspector panel. I have two options. One option is to click and drag all in one motion one of these skyboxes into the sky material field here. It currently says skybox material, none. And I could just click and drag and drop a skybox into that field. And now you can see that my sky has inherited a skybox. Alternatively, what I could do is I can click on this little bullet to the right, and I can choose from this list of things that could be interpreted as skyboxes. Now some of these, many of these, are not skyboxes. But I see this one called nighttime. I'm assuming that says sky underneath there. Nighttime simple, that's actually nighttime simple water. Okay, so I don't want that. There's an overcast sky here, and if I just double click, there's an overcast skybox. So you can see that when we're looking through this little browser, it gives you options that may not be the most appropriate ones for a skybox. Okay, but I have overcast sky loaded, and so now, as I'm looking around my island, look at my sky. It looks so much better than it did as a flat blue sky. Okay, so I have a simple light inside my scene, a simple skybox, and if I want to change that, again, edit, render settings, and from render settings I can click and drag and drop my skybox into the skybox material field and hit play again, and now look out over my sky. There we go. So I have a simple environment. I have all the nuts and bolts to create this simple environment. In a later presentation, I'll push a little bit further and we'll talk about some additional terrain tools, like ways to create trees and rocks and kind of paint them into our landscape. And I'll be a little bit more specific about thinking about the design of the island and kind of the flow and maybe some of the narrative that's going along with it, and introduce some additional other points of interest with inside this project. But at least at this point, these are all the basic tools that you need to start familiarizing yourself with Unity and start building your 3D real-time game environment. So I'll continue to post some videos, more tips and tricks and kind of workflow type stuff. And if you have any questions, you can bring those back to class.